This guy, his book is Davos, Aspen, and Yale, My Life Behind the Elite Curtain as a Global Sherpa. He is very well connected. He has been the person as a Sherpa. That's essentially what they call an executive that prepares for a summit conference, just like the Sherpas help the mountain climbers get up Everest. He's the guy who put this all together. So he's one of these guys who really made it all work for the globalists, and now he's going to take them apart. And of course, he's making the rounds in Europe, talking to the BBC, talking to RT this last weekend, made some amazing announcements
bullshit
and
channel,
got into
Sativa
people's
Blues,
faces, like our own American version of Nigel Farage. First of all, he said when he was talking to RT, he said the Davos man is dead. And you have to understand what the Davos man is. This refers to the global elite of wealthy whose members view themselves as completely international. This is something that was created, this term, the Davos man, was created by a political scientist, Samuel Huntington. He said, they are people who have little need for national loyalty, who view national boundaries as obstacles that thankfully are vanishing, and they see national governments as residues from the past, whose only useful function is to facilitate the elite's global operations. The first person you think of when you hear that, isn't it?
I'm here to
is George
facilitate
Soros.
myself,
of course,
and
people like
anybody
Bill
who
Gates
wants
also
to
believe that as well. But that's a
facilitate
very
my Chillstream.
concise definition of who these elitists are. They don't see themselves as belonging to any country. They see themselves as transcending. They see themselves as more important than any country or any national boundary. And as a matter of fact, they want to destroy national boundaries. And they want to destroy the people who work within those. They have nothing but contempt for those who are lower down. So he said, in his interview with RT, he said, the Davos man is dead. He said, look at the people that they're talking to at Davos.
Yeah.
He said, these are people who are on their way out, people like John Kerry. And then, of course, he went on the BBC and he shocked them with his bluntness. He said, obviously, Trump does not want a union, a European Union, that is tilted toward Germany. He said he is going to deal with nations bilaterally, but he is not going to deal with a supranational bureaucracy that is not democratic. And that's precisely what the European Union is. He said Trump won't cow down to the powers that be. He'll speak his mind even if it gets him in trouble or is held in disregard by others. It used to be called honesty. But now in this current age, he said, of baby talk and political correctness and mostly bullshit, it's now regarded as dishonesty. And that, of course, was a very shocking bit of frankness coming out of him. And then he kind of channeled Nigel Farage. Remember when Nigel Farage said, the first European president, Herman von Rompuy, he said, you have the demeanor of a third-rank bank clerk. Who are you to take away an elected official in Greece and impose a banker in the heart of the place that created democracy? And so today, or over this weekend, Ted Malloch said of Mr. Juncker, the current European president, he said he was a very adequate mayor, I think, of some city in Luxembourg, and maybe he should go back there and do that again. So that's pretty amazing. But he also says that Trump is not going to back down. Trump is not going to be cowed down. And of course, Ted Malloch is not going to be bowed down as well. One other thing that he said that really threw the gauntlet down and got them talking, and this was about a week and a half ago, he said that he was part of the State Department. He was a scholar diplomat with the State Department. He said, I was part of the organization that helped to bring down the Soviet Union. And he said, maybe there's another union that needs a little taming. And of course, by that, he meant the European Union. He supports Brexit, and he believes that the euro is doomed. But of course, the people have pushed back at this. The European Union has said that they want to block Trump's appointment, to which Ted Malloch said, well, maybe they don't realize that Trump won the American election and that it is the prerogative of countries to choose who they want to send as ambassadors to other places. And even The Guardian agreed with that. Even The Guardian said it was never a requirement of envoys to the Soviet Union that they support communism. It wasn't a requirement of those who go to Saudi Arabia that they support Islam or that they support the misogyny policies that come out of Saudi Arabia, or even that they would decline to support Sharia law or communism. That was never a requirement. So we've had a long tradition where we have ambassadors sent to places that don't necessarily agree with the policies of those countries. And yet in the European Union, the globalists who are losing so badly, just as we see here in America in the riots that are happening in the streets, They are desperate to censor and shut down anyone that they cannot defeat in terms of debate. And of course, I don't think they're going to be able to defeat Ted Malloch. He is more than capable of handling himself. As I said before, I think he is America's Nigel Farage.
In case you haven't heard, InfoWars has become the most influential
pig. Bring it down. Bring it down, the pig. Let's listen to this man talking about gold.
Tuesday, February 7th, 2017, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. First of all, I'd like to say that that's Billy, the Shih Tzu, if you don't know who he is. He's my dog. Sometimes he'll be on the video, sometimes he won't. Depends what he's up to in the house. But anyway, I'd like to make a video covering precious metals, the dollar, mostly currencies this morning. Mainly because yesterday I found it was an interesting day for gold. I've been following gold for over 15 years, or about 15 years, I would say. And I know pretty much the patterns that the price of gold follows during the day. And yesterday was a rare day, in my opinion. Gold firmed up all along, during the U.S. hours, since it opened around 8:20 Eastern Standard Time or 1:20 p.m. London, up until 6:30 p.m. London or 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Gold crept up the whole day, and that was in spite of the dollar being relatively firm. It was weak against the yen, I know, but against the pound and the euro, it was fairly steady to firmer. And what was more interesting was that gold, actually, after the regular trading hours on COMEX, which closes at 1:30 p.m. New York time, gold kept creeping up, and it even broke through 1230, which was a key resistance most of the day, and that was very surprising to me. And we traded all the way up to 1,235 on the access session in New York. So what am I trying to say here? Am I saying that things are changing and the gold price is going to reflect the real fundamentals? Maybe. I just wanted to point out that it was a very unusual, it was a rare day yesterday, because most of the time, when the gold price is fairly firm in the afternoon in London, early afternoon New York time, if you see the dollar creeping up, how it did late yesterday, invariably gold drops. But it didn't, so that's surprising. This morning, though, the dollar, well, right now it's 12 o'clock London time, roughly, so 7 a.m. New York. The dollar is fairly strong. We're up back above 100 on the dollar index. We're at 100.61. It's up 0.71, so fairly strong, particularly against the pound. The pound is down almost 100 pips at 123.73, down 0.75%. The euro is down about 0.7% as well. And the dollar has strengthened against the yen, back above 112. It's 112.40, so up 0.2% roughly. And yeah, gold is down, but it's at 12.30, which is down about $5 from the high yesterday. And it's still up about $10 on the week. And that's in spite of a stronger dollar. So what I'm trying to say here as well is that gold can also go up when the dollar goes up. That happened, I think, in 07, 08. So, you know, just because the dollar index is firming up a bit doesn't mean gold is going to go lower. Even though we're lower here today, on the week, we're firmer. What else? The Dow is up 52 points at 20,100. S&P up 5. At almost 2,300, it's at 22.98. But what I wanted to talk more about is the currency markets. I think the euro was fairly weak yesterday, and gold was quite strong against the euro yesterday as well, mainly because there's a lot of political uncertainty in Europe, particularly in France. We're seeing the spread between the 10-year
This guy has a Shih Tzu, a dog. I knew a guy who only had cats, but he never cleaned up his house, so his house was a Shih Tzu.
Yeah, it's the widest it's been for a while, which means there's political risk. One of the candidates in France, the Fillon, who's Marine Le Pen's main opposition, he's been having political problems in terms of corruption. He came out yesterday with a speech saying, you know, he supposedly paid his wife a lot of money, but he said she was working for him, and he kind of tried to put it under the carpet. The markets didn't really seem to like it. So in terms of bonds, let's have a look here, an overview of European bonds this morning, and the yields, of course. So France right now, the yield has dropped 4 basis points. So
when you want to speculate in Belgium, you have to stay 6 months in one asset. So what the fuck is
so that's
point of trading?
But in the last month, the 10-year French yield has gone up 27 basis points, and the German's only gone up 8. So that shows that there's risk there. Italy is still, you know, that yield is up about 37 basis points.
To clarify again, if you want to trade, you have to go into one.
I would say, you know, I've worked
and
in
then
the bond
stay in it
markets
for 6 months, or otherwise you pay a fine.
And, yes, they're creeping up, but I don't think it's anything disastrous at the moment. This is fairly, how can I say?
So the only thing you can buy is gold and silver for
there is no
or
panic
Bitcoin.
here at the moment,
The rest
and
is
I'll
bullshit.
keep an eye
Stock
on
trading.
the yields. The U.S.
Going into the stocks now is like going into the stocks in 28, 29, just before the shit totally crashes.
So
you can make a fortune or you can lose it all. But 90% of the stocks will lose it all, and 10% will go up, and all the rest will just go down. That's my opinion.
Back up to 995, you know, after being down to 940 a few weeks ago. So we are almost back up to 1,000. We dropped to, I think, around 900 when we had that big correction in December. And the recent high in the price of gold is about 1,067. And it just goes to show that it's a good currency to have, gold.
Precious metals and
especially
food.
When you're
and gas,
national
maybe.
Currency.
all things that burn easy,
being
like paper,
debauched,
skins,
or
tobacco,
debased.
weed.
It's always a good
other herbs that burn,
to
herbs
have.
in general.
So
that's all good to have.
As I finish here, it's 12:15.
Seeds is one of the most important things. I'm going to have to get more seeds, especially when you got a garden or some dirt laying around.
Down about 5.
Precious metals, not so much. Not so much.
Dollar index is at par 59.
Just a bit.
So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. The fact that gold had a very good day yesterday, not just because it went up in price over 1%, but for when during the day it went up, during US hours. That tells me we need to keep an eye on it, and it tells me that probably this move higher is for real. Bitcoin, 1,050 almost here, so Bitcoin doing very well. So if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, share it far and wide. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do. And if you'd like to donate to my channel, there's some links below in the description. Thank you and take care. Bye.
Gonna have to tell that to my buddy that silver is up to the 30-day average, 5%. That's pretty amazing.
Hi, I'm Max Kaiser. This is the Kaiser Report. Hey, have you noticed the world's turned upside down? Things look really messed up. Well, it turns out there could be a connection to corn, hamsters, and cannibalism. Let's find out more from... Hey, what's going on here?
I've had too much corn this morning.
What?
Max, you have often talked about the problem of monoculture and the absence of diversity, and this is one of the arguments against selective TPP and TTIP, these trade deals which impose onerous copyright and patent laws on the rest of the world. These patent laws created in America and imposed on the rest of the world. We have proof now that these monocultures actually drive us crazy. Collapsing habitat, turning hamsters into crazed cannibals. The wild European hamster, also known as Cricetus cricicus, has suffered from a collapse of habitat with their diets almost completely destroyed. These were common in Eastern Europe, they still are, but they almost went extinct in Western Europe. And part of it is that why they're so critically endangered is that they used to dine on a variety of roots, insects, and grains. However, because of changing farming practices, they say, in northeastern France, and the emphasis on industrial grown corn or maize has eliminated many food sources. So what's happened is that these hamsters that are critically endangered in Western Europe have begun eating their babies.
Yes, biodiversity and copyright and patent law. But before getting into that, when I first saw this mentioned in my tweet stream, I immediately thought of the American diet, which if you combine corn plus high fructose corn syrup, which is in virtually every single thing you buy at the supermarket, the American diet is literally 60% corn and high fructose corn syrup. So when you look at the Trump presidency, it's like America eating its young. It's like cannibalism has come to the American Senate and Congress and body politic and the constituencies of all the houses of representation all over America. But now getting back to biodiversity, as we've said, as we've pointed out, as we've mentioned, when you remove diversity from the ecosystem, you end up with dangerous monocultures and sudden collapse. That can happen in the bee culture, sudden colony collapse. It can happen now with hamsters eating their babies. It can happen in the American political system, controlled by monopolists and oligopolists who like the patents. They like the copyright. They like to control everything. That's a lack of diversity, a lack of competition. That's what the Soviet Union tried, and it collapsed in 1989. Why is America trying to become like the Soviet Union? Why are they going down that path? While Russia, meanwhile, is becoming like America in 1950, with Putin is now the new Eisenhower.
So let's turn back to the story, because I mentioned that hamsters turn to cannibals. They eat their young when they have a monoculture, when they have only the corn to eat, when they're not having a diverse diet. So you mentioned that it's like the American diet, and I do want to point out the researchers also say it's this B3 in particular. If they give a vitamin B3 injection to these hamsters, they become more sane. They also mentioned that an absence of B3 is found in humans because of a corn diet. Improperly cooked maize-based diets have been associated with higher rates of homicide, suicide, and cannibalism in humans. So I want to bring all of this copyright patent sort of cartel and
I thought you were Pete Townsend there for a second.
and this monoculture to no place more indicative of this than Florida, because of course, Florida is home to Disney World, Mickey Mouse. And I have two headlines from Florida that baffled investigators, baffled police, baffled prosecutors, baffled the world. This is from 2016. Cannibal frat boy who killed a couple then ate the man's face was not under the influence of bath salts or flakka, toxicology reports reveal. Then from Miami in 2012, Miami police shoot, kill man eating another man's face. Here we have the Americans on a diet of corn and a diet of Mickey Mouse in Florida, and they're eating people's faces. Nobody can figure out why, and perhaps these little hamsters in France are a reason.
Well, Clarice, it's the silence of the lambs. Now, we must remember to put the lotion on, or you get the hose again. Put the lotion on, or you get the hose again. Now, Disney is a copyright monopolist, and every time Mickey Mouse is ready to enter the public domain, they engage in a Copyright Extension Act through Congress, and you end up with perpetual copyright, which is brain deadening, and cannibalism results, obviously, intellectual cannibalism. That's why all Hollywood movies are retreads of the movie you saw last summer. That's why it's Disney, that's why it's superhero comic book version 47. We've seen it already, except this time it's in 3D.
That's why I'm watching a clown like you now.
Goggle that lets the teenager boys in the audience play with their choo-choos while they're getting cozy with Scarlett Johansson. But other than that, it's the same freaking story over and over and over again, protected by perpetual copyright, giving Disney rentier. They give them rent. They give them a tax on our imagination for nothing.
Well, I mean, we had mentioned that Donald Trump got rid of the TPP deal, the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal. And here's a headline relating to Mickey Mouse and this whole copyright and patent cartel that was part of that TPP. It was one of the most important elements of the trade deal that everybody rejected, and also the investor-state dispute settlements. But in this case, Dean Baker says, David Leonard says the future of the free world depends on longer copyrights for Mickey Mouse. So David Leonard is from the New York Times. He's part of the whole so-called progressive sort of media and speaks for the Democrats. So Democrats pick up on that, and they're saying, well, Donald Trump pulling out of the TPP deal is bad because, you know what? Part of the TPP deal was that all of these Asian nations were going to join in the U.S. copyright and patent sort of system, and this is a good thing. And Dean Baker is arguing that, in fact, these copyrights, 75 years, is not what they say. They say that we need this for innovation.
That's completely and diametrically opposed to the truth. Ideas, our birthright, come from the collective unconscious. They are granted temporary monopoly value under Article 17 of the Constitution, originally for 14 years with a 14-year extension. Then they re-enter the public domain. Ideas are owned by the public. They're shared publicly. All creativity references previous creativity. There is no virgin creative idea like that comes from Nowhere. That's a false idea. It doesn't exist in the universe, in our consciousness as humans. The idea that this fellow is putting forward, that perpetual copyright, and it should be rolled out universally across the globe, is enslavement. It's intellectual enslavement. This guy is for slave labor and for the deprivation of us, of our birthright, of our own minds, our own ideas, our own imaginations. This guy is a charlatan.
But also there's a monoculture of ideas.
Where do I sign up?
Both Republicans and the Democrats, all our so-called right-left
I want money for it, lots of it, for my imagination.
Onerous copyright laws and patents are the way out. So when you think of innovation, when you think of artistic creation, who do you think of as the two greatest artists in history, for example? Michelangelo, Da Vinci, working together against each other. They were competitors in Florence at the same time. Michelangelo made David, the statue, between 1501 and 1504. Da Vinci did the Mona Lisa, 1503. Same time, two of the most famous works of art ever created at the same time. Did they have copyright over that? No, this was done under a patronage system. They were set into a competition, a reality show of the day back in Florence, competing against each other. Actually, Michelangelo won, and Da Vinci left and went to Paris, and that's where the Mona Lisa is today. So there are other alternatives, and that they say over and over and over and over again that there's only one. There's extending copyright forever and forever into the future.
Well, I'll give you a more contemporary example. If this copyright regime is rolled out as articulated by this fellow at the New York Times, there would be no Bob Dylan. Nobel laureate Bob Dylan would not exist. Virtually everything Bob Dylan has on a record is taken from previous source material. And guess who tells you that? Guess who tells us this? Guess who admits to this? Bob Dylan. Okay, so according to this New York Times fella, the whole idea and process of creativity as expressed by this Nobel laureate, Bob Dylan, doesn't exist, and we should ignore that. We should instead write a check to Disney and open our brains and put a pipe in here and just monetize every single thought we can possibly have and put the money in their pocket, but we have dominion over nothing of our own corpus, our own imagination, our own existence. We don't exist. Only Mickey Mouse exists. That's tyranny. That's the height of tyranny. That's Pol Pot on copyright steroids. This guy is a charlatan. He's an ignoramus, and anyone who follows him is a dope.
You know, there was also another famous writer, of course. Many people have heard of William Shakespeare. He also copied and competed with Ben Jonson and Christopher Marlowe. Again, three of the greatest playwrights in history, and everybody knows them, and they were competing and stealing from each other. And we have these amazing works of art now, of literature. And Shakespeare, also like Bob Dylan, would also be a copy. He would be like the equivalent of Kim.com. He would have all the SWAT teams descending on him. You stole Ben Jonson's stuff. You stole Christopher Marlowe's lines. And, you know, he would be in hiding Kim.com today.
Read your Aristotle, who pointed out, you know, thousands of years ago that there are only a few basic stories and the variations thereof. So had Aristotle copyrighted or patented his works, then all creative pursuits from that time going forward would have to end, and we would be paying perpetual copyright to the heirs of Aristotle. That's what this guy's arguing, and it's lunacy, it's dangerous, it's anti-humanity. This is the worst kind of anti-humane, tyrannical thinking possible. Ask Lawrence Lessig. Look up Lawrence Lessig and educate yourselves.
And I want to quickly turn back to Dean Baker's column because, you know, right and left also say we can't have protectionism for, like, protecting jobs in America. It's David Ricardo. You have to go to, you know, if Mexico can produce it cheaper, we'll go there. But they have protectionism for this copyright and intellectual property. And he mentions that it's actually very costly. And the Obama administration, at the request of the entertainment industry, the software industry, the pharmaceutical industry, insisted on stronger and longer patent and copyright-related protections in the TPP. Unfortunately, the projections of the economic impact of the TPP do not take account of the cost of these protections. They say it's all benefit, no cost.
The cost of creativity goes up, and therefore the price of being human also goes up, and therefore this guy's encouraging mass suicide, which we've seen in places like India.
Intellectual suicide.
When copyright and patents are imposed on corn and agricultural items in India, the result is mass suicide. Do you want that across the globe, you fanatical idiot? Hey, stay tuned for the second half. A lot more coming your way. Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. Time now to go to Boulder, Colorado, and speak with Rick Ackerman of Rick's Picks. Rick, welcome back.
Morning, Max. Thanks for inviting me on.
A lot has happened since we last spoke, like Donald Trump. Trump immediately quashed the TPP trade deal, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and began the process of renegotiating NAFTA. Is this a positive or a negative, Rick?
I think it depends on how it plays out, Max, but based on the loose cannon effect that we've seen so far, or at least the possibility, it makes the Smoot-Hawley look like a pretty mild piece of legislation.
All right, for those who might not be familiar with Smoot-Hawley, just refresh our memory.
Well, it was a tariff regimen that came just before the stock market crash, and of course, ever since, the crash and the depression have been attributed to these many tariffs that were implemented at the time. And Trump certainly seems like a very tariff. He's very pro-tariff, and of course, in the classical economic scheme of things, that's a bad thing. But I don't think that the actual enactment of these new trade laws, or at least the abrogation of the current treaties, is going to play out the way you might think. I think over time, Trump will strike some good deals, but he's going to have to be very careful because Mexico will obviously be the country most immediately affected, and they're I guess teetering already.
Okay, we'll get into Mexico in a second, but you mentioned there the tariffs that were imposed before the crash. We're talking about the 29 crash, the big crash that set off the depression. Just looking at the stocks and bonds for a second, stocks first, do they appear toppy to you, or do they have room to go on the upside? You're a technical analyst, I should point out, and you look at charts all day long. Do you see room on the upside for stocks?
Well, I like to think of myself as the most bullish bear out there. And, you know, over the years that we've been talking, that I've been more or less a perma bear, but on a purely technical basis, I forecast a Dow rally that would be about 1,000 points from where we are right now.
And on the bond market, of course, everyone's gotten that wrong for 10 years, or I'd say. They've been calling for bonds to make a major move down. We've seen nothing but rallies, part of a 35-year bull market in bonds. Where's the quick update on that?
There's some really good guys that are saying that this is really the bond market that has been going on for the bull market since '81 is over. I've been pretty committed to the deflationist argument, and I think that bonds are going to have another very significant rally higher, but not in an ordinary way. I think that is most likely to occur in the context of some global economic collapse, but I do see a final flight to safety into U.S. bonds, and I'm questioning whether the long period of disinflation that we've had is actually over.
So if NAFTA ends, who loses, who wins?
Well, Mexico is a big loser here. And the thing is, you know, to put it in the perspective of the wall, Trump has recently said, well, you know, if the president of Mexico isn't on board for paying for it outright, then we'll just have to make Mexico pay with taxes, which effectively a tariff would be. But Mexico, since NAFTA was enacted in, I think it was 1994, so it's had 22 years to run, and Mexico's growth over that time has only been about 2.5%, which would be about half of what you might expect for an emerging nation. So forecasts for Mexico over the next year are under 2%. So if you slap some sort of tariff on them, even the wall part of it will be self-defeating because the Mexican economy will crash, and of course, however high the wall is, they're going to be clamoring to get into the U.S.
He seems pretty adamant about this wall going up, and do you think he understands the full economic picture here? The idea, I guess, is to get jobs moving back into the U.S. where they've fled to Mexico. It's very bullish, according to his constituency, his voters, his base. But you're saying the stock market goes up, the bond market goes up. So if Mexico craters and jobs move to America and people are getting rich in their 401k plans, who cares?
I think we will care. And, even on there's so much Mexican labor in the U.S. that we would have an inflationary spiral if they were all made to go back to Mexico. They're a very significant part of the workforce. And, Trump's had a propensity to kind of say something crazy, but I think when it comes to the details, he's sorting them out and for the most part getting it right. Even with the auto manufacturers, he's leaned very heavily on GM. And, one of the particular cars, I think it's the Chevy Volt. It's a really small Chevy that you can't even sell in the U.S. And it turns out that most of the Chevy Volts that are manufactured in Mexico get exported to countries other than the U.S. But you can see that the big auto manufacturers are already at least getting interested in the idea that the tax incentives will skew enough their way that they can start producing higher ticket vehicles, SUVs and trucks. So I think that will be a constructive movement of capital into the U.S. or for that matter, a constructive trend in capital investment.
Well, it just seems, Rick, that markets aren't buying the doom scenario, as I pointed out. Stocks and bonds are going up. You're projecting for stocks and bonds to go up. What about a regime change in Mexico? Biggest problem in Mexico right now is that the current government is corrupt. Popularity is extremely low because the government understands it's highly corrupt. What about a regime change in Mexico? Get a new leadership in there, something a little bit more dynamic, entrepreneurial. It may force a regime change. Isn't that a positive?
I think that Enrique Nieto has been a good leader for Mexico. And, you have to look at Mexico's history. They've had so much really bad luck. A lot of the ups and downs in Mexico have been in the economy have been exacerbated by swings in the price of oil. And it seems like every time they get a little wind at their backs from one thing or another, these cyclical forces go against them, even U.S. recession. So I wouldn't blame the leadership there. And I don't think I don't think they're going to have a change in leadership. But I think over time, Nieto and Trump will find a way to work things out.
Our contacts in Mexico and Mexico City and all over Mexico, they seem to have a different view. They really believe the current president is corrupt and needs to be gotten rid of. But let's kind of return to the stock market for a second, because here's an interesting, I'm going to digress a little bit, give you a theory of mine. The markets are basically being fed in large part by guys like Warren Buffett buying these huge controlling stakes with 0% money. He said he bought $12 billion worth of stocks based on Trump becoming president. They're a big holder of Apple Computer now and other big cap stocks. Is there a possibility, Rick, going forward, if deflation continues, as you say, and interest rates are at 0% going forward, isn't America effectively being taken private by a few oligarchs? In other words, there is no business cycle. There is no downside risk. There's simply an unlimited amount of cash by a few oligarchs to buy stocks in perpetuity until they're basically all taken off the board. America is taken private.
Trust me, at some point along the way, the risk will become more apparent. Schwarzman just reported enormous earnings for his private equity firm, but Buffett's the guy who's really kind of nailed down the land, sea, and air. He has bought the food chain, he's bought the railroad right-of-ways, the insurance companies. And when you think about that, come hell or high water, if we go into a depression, you're still going to be paying Buffett by way of your Geico auto insurance. So I would say he's kind of bomb-proof, whereas a lot of the private equity funds are not. The Schwarzman's fund has gone, for one, very heavily into real estate. And the idea, it sort of plays off the wrong, a very dangerous assumption, and that is that because the first-time buyers are no longer, they don't exist. No one can afford to get into the housing market now if you haven't been in it for the last 10 years. So, some of these big private equity funds have bought up huge swaths of real estate, And a friend of mine was doing it in Denver. He says his private equity fund had zero experience in real estate, and they gave him the assignment of just going in there and buying blocks of houses. It didn't matter where or how much he paid. So you can see that the rent market has really topped out now, and the valuations for some of these homes that were acquired on spec for rentals is going to come to no good.
We just had an experience where the huge private equity owners of real estate, remember after the 2008 crash, some of these guys moved in, including Buffett, and bought tens of thousands, if not 100,000 flats, apartments, and housing stock. And they just lobbied government to enable them to securitize, financialize, and trade securities collateralized by rent. So again, my point is that if you have unlimited capital at your disposal at 0% interest rate, and there's no laws to stop you from creating any financial instrument you want, and you've got the government in your pocket, where's the downside? In other words, just if there is any move down 10 or 20%, they'll just move in and buy it on the cheap, and they'll just keep at it until basically America is taken private and there's no more public market anymore.
It's true that the public market is somewhat vanished, even in the IPO sector. You know, you've got a lot of essentially privately financed startups that otherwise would have gone the way of public listings. But I think you're underestimating the risk, for one, in real estate. In the worst of times, the 0% interest is not going to make the difference because you'll still have negative appreciation in the home. We saw this in 2007, 2008. It didn't matter whether your mortgage rate was 3%. If the home was losing 10% of its value per year, you were in trouble. So I think the valuations that have gone into real estate deals are they pose very serious risk for these big firms that you say have the government in their pocket. That's true, they do, but they're still taking risks, and ultimately it will depend on how good the tenants are. A mile from where I live, there's a complex called the Horizons, which traded for many hundreds of millions of dollars. The company that bought this apartment complex, which is high end, the first thing they did was raise the rents. But you can see that the people who live in these units are many from India, and you can assume that they all have very good jobs in the high-tech sector in Boulder. But the rents are exorbitant, and if anything were to disrupt the economy, their ability to pay rent would be challenged.
Okay, Rick, got to cut it off there. Nice talking with you again. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for inviting me on. Always a pleasure, guys.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Kaiser Report with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Rick
very
Ackerman
interesting. Bullshit.
If you want to reach us on Twitter, it's
bullshit going down.
Bye, y'all.
It's all coming down, and I'm just sitting in the front row. Thanks for watching.